Bonjour à toutes et à tous, et merci de l'intérêt que vous avez porté à ce webinaire, le deuxième dans notre série Développement en matière des droits humains. Welcome and thank you for your interest in this webinar, which is the second in our series, Developments in Human Rights, meaning to address ongoing human rights situations. Many of us today are speaking to you from unceded Algonquin territory. I am Penelope Simons. I'm a professor of common law at the Common Law faculty and the new director of the Human Rights Research and Education Center at the University of Ottawa. So we're very pleased to be partnering today with the Youth and Justice Lab at the Department of Law and Legal Studies of Carleton University and with the Council of Jurists for a Democratic Iran. Protests erupted in Tehran in late December, initially in response to rampant inflation, and they've since spread across the country, with many calling for an end to the current regime. The government of Iran has responded, as you've seen in the newspapers, with brutal force, killing a huge number, an unprecedented number of protesters and detaining tens of thousands of others across the country. And many of the detainees are facing expedited judicial proceedings under capital charges. Iranians have also been subjected to over 18 consecutive days, if not more, of complete internet blackout. And this remains a problem. And today we're going to discuss the current human rights situation in Iran, the human rights and international criminal law implications of the Iranian government's crackdown on protesters, how the death penalty is being used against protesters, and other issues. So I'm going to pass the floor now to Mana Hosaro Shahi, who's a PhD candidate at the School of International Development and Global Studies at the University of Ottawa and a member of the Human Rights Research and Education Center, who's going to introduce our four speakers today. Go ahead, Mana. Thank you.
Thank you, Penelope. I would like to start by passing my condolences to the people of Iran for this unprecedented loss. And I will be introducing the speakers in the order that they will be speaking. Dr. Saba Wasafi is an award-winning human rights journalist, media lecturer at the University of Sydney, a filmmaker, and a poet. Her work on the gendered impacts of seeking asylum received a Premier's Media Award, and she has twice served as a jury member for the Kennedy Awards for Outstanding Journalism in Human Rights, Social, and Religious Affairs. Her journalism and documentaries have been widely featured and acclaimed internationally. Dr. Wasafi is also a member of the 2026 UN Women Delegation and will present at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women in New York. Bahar Sabah is a human rights lawyer trained at the University of Tehran and University of Nottingham, and also has an MPhil in Middle Eastern Studies, Modern Middle Eastern Studies from the University of Oxford. She's currently a senior researcher at Human Rights Watch, and prior to joining Human Rights Watch, Bahar worked at several international human rights organizations, including Amnesty, Reprieve, and Article 19, where she investigated a wide range of human rights issues such as the death penalty, arbitrary detentions, torture and ill treatment, unlawful use of force, discrimination on various grounds, and accountability. Bahar has also worked as an investigator with a UN-established investigative body. Hossein Raisi is an Iranian human rights lawyer and academic with over 33 years of experience in criminal law, human rights litigation, teaching, and research. His work has focused on abolishing the death penalty and defending the rights of various marginalized groups. He founded the Human Rights Committee of the Fars Province Bar Association and the Nedaya Adalat, or Voice of Justice, Legal Association in Shiraz. Pressure from the authorities ultimately forced him to emigrate to Canada, where he's widely recognized as an expert in Sharia law and criminal justice. He has consulted for organizations such as Amnesty, FHI 360, and the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center. He is also the director of the Youth Justice Lab at Carleton University, serves on the board of the Canadian Center for Victims of Torture, and is a co-founder of the Council of Jurists for a Democratic Iran. And finally, we have Dr. Omid Milani. Dr. Milani is a scholar of human rights law and a multimedia artist whose work engages interdisciplinary and transformative approaches to contemporary human rights discourse. His research interests span law and aesthetics, domestic and state-sponsored violence, constitutional rights and freedoms, political philosophy, and socio-legal studies of human rights. His current research focuses on the right to self-determination, critiquing the state, critiquing hierarchy in law, examining the origins and present-day manifestations of state use of force, as well as diversifying the methods of academic research and expression within legal scholarship. He's currently a fellow at the Human Rights Research and Education Center and an artist in residence with the Edgelands Institute. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I pass it back to Penelope to moderate the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mana. And just for those attending the webinar, thank you for coming, and to let you know that you can ask questions through the question and answer mechanism on the Zoom feed. And we will attempt to answer them either during the speaking of the webinar or afterwards during the question and answer session. So let's start with you, Dr. Saba Vasefi. Thank you very much for coming to speak to us about this. There are various news agencies, activists, and human rights organizations that are reporting about the unprecedented scale of human rights violations in Iran. And they are shocking, even considering the grim record of the current regime. So I wondered if you could please speak to what these violations are, their scale, and then perhaps compare them to other historical examples of state violence, both within Iran and globally. Thank you. Oh, we can't hear you. Muted.
Sorry. Thanks for having me. The January 2026 massacre publicly exhibited the regime's industry of killing. It clearly unveiled the structural reality of a religious fascist state that engages in extermination of civilians with war-grade weapons only for their belief, based on the fact that we are receiving, unmediated fact we are receiving. State actors have shown the world that they operate as a regime of invisibilization, forcibly sustaining domination under the command of an unelected so-called supreme leader. And these days we all know that the regime has recruited so many lobbies, actively are working in human rights industry, media, academia, so many other places, and their tasks are sugarcoating the scale of mass atrocity or laundering the state narrative. However, the visual, audio, or textual evidence confirm that the state atrocity crimes were coordinated, systematic, deliberate, and widespread. And all of these hybrid forms of evidence shattered the regime's attempt to conceal its pattern of terror. In relation to the second part of your question, the model of this form of mass killing was first tested by the Islamic State occupying in Iran, in Syria, where the Islamic Republic deployed the IRGC and its proxy, including Hezbollah, Fatemiyun, Zainabiyun, to support Assad forces to kill Syrian people. But in Iran, mass killing occurred faster and on a larger scale within 2 days than in Syria. And all of these events unfolded under condition of pervasive total state control of information. And historically, newspapers, radios, televisions were state monopolies. And every public space, such as mosques, schools, universities, have been policed by the regime. And that's why for a long time the regime homogeneous state narrative was established. But these days we can see the state narratives are now visibly defied.
Thank you very much, Saba, for that setting the groundwork for us and the scene for us about what's going on there. Let's now turn to you, Bahar Saba. Thank you very much for taking the time to come and speak to us. Could you please talk about the government's violence against the protesters and the others from the perspective of international human rights law and international criminal law? So what violations and crimes have allegedly been committed, and then what types of redress do these laws offer in terms of trying to hold people to account for what's going on, but also providing some sort of safety for the people?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and for organizing this webinar. And I'd like to also start by expressing my condolences and solidarity, and by commemorating all the thousands of lives that have been now violently taken, people from all walks of life who have taken to the streets in the hope of a better future. Children, men, women, older people, students, teachers, medical professionals, laborers, shopkeepers, and also to remember the many families who at the moment are also dealing with the uncertainty of enforced disappearances, as they do not know where their loved ones are, if they're detained or killed. So from this point, I'm going to start by very briefly speak about the deadliest protest crackdown that we have documented from the 28th of December, present some of the evidence we have analyzed and some of the findings we've had. So many would have seen from the news that the protest broke out on the 28th, and that by early January, Iran's security forces had unlawfully resorted to lethal force and firearms, killing and injuring many. These were carried out alongside mass arrests across the country, while the authorities also used the demonizing rhetoric against protesters by calling them rioters, and by vowing a harsh response. By that point, which is just the very first stage, we had already documented many of the patterns that the authorities have relied on over the past years in order to brutally repress protests. That is the use of firearms that should have no place in policing of protests, the use of metal pellets that should be absolutely prohibited, arbitrary detentions, and so on. From the 8th of January, when the protests started to grow significantly larger across the country, Iran's security forces carried out mass killings of protesters and bystanders in a coordinated manner. We have, by Saturday, perhaps when some of the news started to emerge that mass scale killings had been conducted, we were able to gather evidence, including witness testimonies and verified videos that we analyzed, showing patterns of unlawful use of force, security forces relentlessly firing weapons at protesters, including at their heads and torsos, including from the back. These killings that are unprecedented, the massacres, were carried out as the authorities intentionally imposed a communications blackout, an internet shutdown, and other communications restrictions in order to conceal the true scale of the atrocities. Nonetheless, the evidence has shown that these killings have been carried out across the country on an unprecedented scale. Alongside these, just to mention, and again, as many of the audience would have seen, harrowing videos of families looking for their loved ones in morgues. Just within the first few days, we were able to count hundreds of bodies in just 3 videos from one morgue alone in Tehran. And that in itself is a really horrific indication of the scale of killings across the country. And since then, we have received mounting evidence is coming out effectively. So this situation is not one that has ended, and that's key to remember. First, we have, by reports of human rights organizations, tens of thousands of people who are arbitrarily detained at risk of torture. Many individuals are subjected to enforced disappearances. Individuals have been subjected to torture, both in custodial settings and also in an extra custodial settings on the streets when they were restrained and beaten by batons and other weapons at the moment of arrest. Authorities are refusing systematically to disclose the fate and whereabouts of those detainees to families, which constitutes enforced disappearances. And we are facing a large-scale range of human rights violations. Just to name a few, we have unlawful killings in circumstances that there has not been an imminent threat of death. The use of lethal force in these circumstances is unlawful. We have arbitrary detentions, torture, denial of truth and justice, and many other violations. In terms of crimes under international law, again, we have the crime of torture, that again has been committed in both custodial settings and is ongoing, with many at risk at the moment, as well as enforced disappearances. In relation to other crimes under international law, of course, this is a situation that, due to the scale of it and the fact that the authorities have been waging a campaign of cover-ups, would take time in terms of gathering and analyzing all the evidence. But I would like to draw attention to the findings of the fact-finding mission that was established by the UN in 2022 in response to the brutal crackdown of the Women, Life, Freedom protest. The fact-finding mission, when they examined evidence of that crackdown, which had many of the patterns, which now we are seeing on a much larger scale, came to the conclusions of crimes against humanity, of murder, torture, enforced disappearances, persecution, rape and other sexual violence, and other crimes. So now the fact-finding mission has now been mandated again by the UN with a mandate of 2 years to do a special inquiry into this unprecedented crackdown on mass killings. And I should also mention that the special rapporteur has also mentioned that potential crimes against humanity should be investigated, including by this fact-finding mission. I'm going to very briefly now talk about what has been one of the root causes here, which is the absolute impunity, structural, systematic, that Iran's authorities have had for decades now, that has enabled them to time and again commit bloodshed without any legal criminal consequences. The entire legal and judicial system has been set up in a manner that protects and shields perpetrators instead of guaranteeing impunity. Just to break down, perhaps, when it comes to the right to protest, Iran's constitution and other laws do not guarantee the right to peaceful assembly in line with international law. Assemblies are only allowed when they are requested by registered political parties. Registering political parties is effectively an impossibility because of the criteria that the authorities have put in place that excludes everyone. And protests or assemblies that do not have a license are considered illegal. And under the law, security forces are authorized to use lethal force and firearms in order to repress protest. This is an absolute breach of international law. And this is alongside other pieces of legislation, absolute lack of legislation that criminalizes torture, for example, or puts in place the mechanisms for investigations. So we are facing, for decades of repeated gross violations under international law, as well as crimes under international law, including crimes against humanity, where no official responsible has ever been held into account. And it is in this light that accountability avenues, some of which have been recommended by the fact-finding mission, and I can mention some of them later, need to be urgently and concretely pursued by the international community.
Thank you very much, Bahar. For setting that out for us. It is. I'm going to now turn to Dr. Hussein Rahesi. I want to ask you about protests and the death penalty. So could you please tell us about the regime's use of the death penalty against protesters? And do you have a sense of how many people are currently at risk? And also, this is a lot of questions all at once. I hope you don't mind. But what are the criminal charges that are being used against protesters? And if you could please talk about the extent to which these prosecutions are consistent with existing laws and procedures, or are they actually deviating from the law in Iran, even within the constraints of the current system? Thanks.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for organizing this event to be voice of Iranian people in this difficult time. I pass my love to all Iranians who are dealing with such a mass killing and mass injure and mass detain in Iran. Yeah, to address this situation, we do need to focus on the pattern of the behavior of the Iranian authority. Unfortunately, from the first time that the Iranian regime became in power in 1979, they have been started mass killing, mass murder, and also mass execution in the country. The Iranian authority are systematically using capital punishment as a tool of political repression. Protesters are arrested, detained, and access to independent legal counsel, subjected to forced confessions under torture and sentenced to death through grossly unfair trials. The Iranian regime increasingly used the death penalty to suppress protests, primarily charging demonstrators with muharebe, is Arabic word for waging war against the God, under Article 279 of the Islamic Penal Code, or corruption on earth under Article 286 of the same law, which carry mandatory death penalty sentence and are applied broadly to unarmed protesters to deter dissent. Since the 2022 Women Life Freedom Operation, at least 11 protesters have been executed, with dozens more sentenced to different charges. In 2025-26 protests, authority announced muharebe charges against an unspecific number, with at least one execution so far, and many more at imminent risk, in mass trial lacking fair process. According to Harana News Agency report, estimated thousands detained, with unders potentially face capital charges. I can explain the muharebe. Muharebe, as I said under Article 279 of the Islamic Penal Code, occurred when a person draw a weapon with the intent to kill, rob, violate to honor of the people or intimidate them, thereby using against the public security. But Iranian regime broadly have been using the same crime and same charges against the unarmed protesters at this moment. Unfortunately, we don't have the specific number, even we don't have the specific number of the people that they have been killed. We have different numbers, and unfortunately, the Iranian regime plays with the numbers of the mass killings that they have been killed many people, and they do the same about the people they have been arrested, and we know that many of them might have or may have facing death sentence, because Iranian authority so far did not allow any lawyers, any independent lawyers, to access the cases, and they have no way and avenue for the family of the people that they have been arrested to be in contact with their loved one, and we don't have any access of the cases and the judiciary official statistic, but we do know that many of them, they are at risk of the death penalty, because death penalty is the way and is the tools that the Iranian authority have been using all the time. At this time, they have many failures to provide even basic needs of the Iranian people, and to provide basic freedom of the people. But they do have many people to kill, many armed force to kill people, and they have many prisons and even unknown prisons to detain, and they have been started to kill and to have I cannot say trial, because when we're talking about the trial, we have to go with some standards. When we are facing with the lack of due process, of course, the system cannot call trial, or the people that sentence protester to death, we cannot call them judges, but we can call them part of the repression and part of the authority, and that they have been using those charges according to Islamic law, based on their own interpretations of the Islamic Quranic law against the civilians.
Thank you very much, Hossein. I'm absolutely speechless with what all of you have said so far. So let's appreciate you setting out these very difficult facts about the situation, all of you. Let's turn now to Omid Milani. So Omid, as a matter of international human rights law and thinking about the philosophical foundations of the modern state, what is the role of the state in protecting and fulfilling human rights? And does this violence by the Iranian government against its own people undermine state sovereignty, which is a cornerstone of international law and protects states? And what does that mean in practical terms?
Thank you, and hello, everyone. Before turning to the question, I would like to thank the Human Rights Research and Education Center for organizing this event, and also thank my esteemed colleagues for their remarks. I must also echo the voice of millions of Iranians across the world and congratulate all brave Iranians who continue to shake the pillars of tyranny and oppression with their courageous deeds, inspiring all free people in and outside of Iran. Turning to the question, I think it is important to begin by making a clear distinction between international law and human rights law. In international law, as you mentioned, the state is the sovereign subject, beyond which no higher authority exists. In human rights law, however, it is the individual and not the state who ought to be understood as sovereign. Human individuals enjoy inherent dignity, and their rights are never granted to them by any state. No state is in such a position to grant rights to citizens, but it is supposed to recognize our human rights. The individual is therefore the sovereign subject in human rights law. At least on the surface, this may appear paradoxical or even contradictory, particularly in the context of authoritarian regimes. How could we speak of two sovereigns in international human rights law? This apparent dilemma is nevertheless resolvable once the state is seen from a purely legal point of view for what it is meant to be, and it is supposed to be, that is to say, their people's representative. In this light, the state's primary role is to guarantee the well-being of its population, to help actualize, secure, and promote human rights and fundamental freedoms, and to ensure the safety and security of its citizens. This understanding of the role of the state is not only embedded in human rights law, it is also grounded in philosophical foundations of the modern state. The raison d'être of the state, and broadly speaking, the rationale behind the creation of the public sphere, of police forces and armies, for instance, is precisely to free and protect citizens from violence, not to abuse it and thereby reproduce it. Therefore, from both a philosophical and a legal standpoint, reconciling state sovereignty in international law with individual sovereignty in human rights law requires us to revisit the state as the people's representative, an entity employed and appointed by the people to serve them. This appointment takes place through a contract that is sometimes ratified in a constitutional document, but always present and implied, nonetheless, as an unwritten constitutional and human rights principle. All peoples have an inherent, inalienable, and universal right to determine their political status, including both the form and the content of their government. To be clear, the people of Iran, like all peoples, have an inherent constitutional and human right to change their regime, their state, its institutions, and the very personalities thereof. This, of course, is a taboo in international law, where speaking of regime change is often treated with deep suspicion. Yet when the question of who is sovereign is left unaddressed, an impasse inevitably arises. On the one hand, we have the sacred principle of state sovereignty in international law, and on the other, the sovereignty of individual in human rights. Even when a state fails to fulfill its raison d'être, it continues to be recognized as sovereign under international law. But from a human rights and constitutional perspective, a state that does not protect its citizens, or in our case commits crimes against them, can no longer bear the crown of sovereignty. In such circumstances, the social and constitutional contract between the state and the people is manifestly terminated. As a matter of human and constitutional rights, the state always owes its sovereignty to this contractual link. The original sovereign is the individual, and state sovereignty is always derivative. And it must be continuously and effectively verified. International law, however, neither desires nor possesses the mechanisms for such verification. It presumes sovereignty so as long as an entity exercises effective control, however unlawful or illegitimate that control may be. The Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States, for example, expresses this disregard for people's sovereignty, making little to no reference to the legitimacy of the states. As a result, unlawful control can be mistaken for sovereignty. And this categorical mistake is lethal. It is therefore imperative to address this ambiguity directly and to clarify who the sovereign truly is. Doing so would require the development of new modalities for recognizing and actualizing the people's right to self-determination. In the case of Iran, this must also be stated that the self of the Iranian people, however one defines the term, does not include the United States of America, nor any other foreign power. Faced with these impasses, international law, with its rather crippled and ineffective institutions, must either evolve to recognize peoples as sovereigns, or if that proves impossible for any reason, give way to new beginnings grounded in the revolutionary spirit of human rights. This means reassessing the state as the servant of the people in light of the socio-political contract with them. Wherever a state manifestly breaches the terms of this contract, wherever it fails to transparently demonstrate the legitimacy of that small but significant hyphen in the modern nation state, wherever it reduces itself to a mere system of control and a repressive apparatus, and particularly where atrocities are committed, that entity ceases to function as a representative. The consent of the people in such cases is vitiated, to say the least, and absent in the case of Iran. And the contract is therefore null and void. The state instead operates as a criminal apparatus akin to an occupying regime, rather than a representative government acting on behalf of its people. And therefore, it must be treated as such. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Omid, for those words of hope, but also pointing out, some of the problems with the international legal system where state sovereignty is used by regimes, authoritarian regimes, as a shield against other things, whereas in other cases it can be used as a sword to protect the peoples. Let me now turn to Dr. Vasevi, to Sabah, and ask you another question. In contexts like Iran, authoritarian contexts, and particularly where they're using tools like internet blackouts, how do we get out information? What are the main sources? How are activists and organizations accessing and verifying it?
I think decades of life under a carceral regime of invisibility have forced Iranians to create and protect online identity for themselves as a way of preserve their reality, because there are systematic efforts by the state to distort the reality and truth. And the information I received from inside Iran in order to cover some of the stories, people communicated with me through satellite phones, foreign SIM cards, or traveling across the border, or some people settle in the border cities in order to transfer the evidence. And while I was receiving all those information, and many of them, you can't see them in the media because they have not been eliminated, they have been severely injured, and they are afraid to reveal their evidences on social media. And by that sort of smuggling data and information from one continent to another, when I was thinking cyberspace these days, or even before, even during Women Life Freedom movement or during Greens movement, cyberspace functions these days as an adversarial zone where evidence can be archived. And specifically these days, we have some organization in Berlin that they are forensically preserve digital evidence documenting a state-sanctioned atrocity. And these materials are so vital and important in order to give some context and scale and pattern of crimes against humanity, because these organizations, they have some specialists to forensically preserve this data and demonstrating by putting all those data next to each other and make the puzzle, you can come to conclusion that the attacks on civilians were systematic, widespread, and can be admissible in the court. And I can see some of your students ask about what can we do, what sort of legal action we can take. For example, in the context of Australia, where I live, Australia recognizes universal jurisdiction. However, the system in Australia is different, for example, to Argentina. Only under with the consent of federal attorney general, a state actor can be prosecuted, or with the federal attorney general consent and written permission, the court can prosecute the state actor who are involved in any form or any shape with crime against humanity. Given that the historical background that the IRCG terrorist entity in Australia had some involvement in some terrorist plot, and Australian government expelled Islamic State occupying in Iran ambassador from Australia, and they designated IRGC as a terrorist entity. They are all those components can back up that sort of legal investigation to stop or prevent further enjoyment of impunity for the Islamic State in Iran.
Thank you very much, Saba. Let me turn to you, Bahar, and perhaps you'd mentioned you could speak a little bit about accountability, methods of accountability, and maybe you can expand a little on what Saba said about universal jurisdiction in order to hold the perpetrators accountable.
Thank you so much. Yes, so perhaps I take a few minutes and just discuss universal jurisdiction a bit more in details and a few other recommendations that have been made to the members of the UN, for example, in terms of accountability. So again, as established by the fact-finding mission, as documented by human rights organizations, there are no prospects for justice domestically. That is because of the manner, as I explained, the entire legal judicial system has been set up, and the special rapporteur on Iran and the fact-finding mission have basically said that there are no prospects for accountability, and that those who seek accountability are those who actually get persecuted instead of, prosecution for those involved in crime. So I'm going to mention a few of the recommendations that the fact-finding mission has made in terms of accountability, because I think they each would provide pathways that could and should be pursued. So one is universal jurisdiction. As mentioned, there are a range of crimes under international law that are considered to be so serious that they could shock the conscience of the world, and as such, regardless of where the crime was committed, where the perpetrator was or is and the victims, then they should fall under jurisdictions of all states. Many states effectively, and then there are different crimes that fall under it, including torture, enforced disappearances, crimes against humanity, and so on. And each domestic jurisdiction is different. Many domestic jurisdictions would require the presence of a suspected individual in their territory. However, some states also have what is called structural investigations, and that means that these states can open investigations into a given situation where crimes under international law has been committed, including crimes against humanity, even without the presence of any suspected individuals. And that would allow for the prosecution authorities to gather and collate and preserve that evidence, which of course would then facilitate prosecution under this principle if an individual appears in any of these jurisdictions. And in this light, the fact-finding mission has also has called for increase in legal cooperation between states, in particular in Europe, and has also called for the establishment of a joint investigative team. And joint investigation teams are one of the tools that are used in international cooperation when it comes to criminal investigations, and that requires agreement between different states and authorities with the aim of carrying out criminal investigations. And the teams generally are composed of prosecutors, law enforcement, judges, and so on. So that is one of the recommendations that, again, the fact-finding mission has made. And a third one that has been made, this is in the 2024 report of the fact-finding mission, where the mission concluded crimes against humanity in relation to the woman life freedom protests, which as I said, had many of the same patterns. Now we are seeing them on a much larger scale during this crackdown. So during those protests, the fact-finding mission had discerned also a particular impact and disproportionate impact on individuals from ethnic minorities. And in that light, in addition to these other recommendations, including on universal jurisdiction, the joint investigation team, they had also called for the states to that are party to the International Convention on Elimination of Racial Discrimination to effectively start a process with a view to submit an application before the International Court of Justice. And that, of course, as we know, some conventions, including ICERD, allows for state parties to take these complaints before the court as a means. And given that the issue would fall under ICERD, this was another mechanism that the fact-finding mission had recommended. Again, there are various ways that the international community could mobilize to use these avenues that international criminal law and international human rights law provides in order to pursue accountability, to ensure that criminal files are prepared on individuals suspected of criminal responsibility for crimes under international law. And there are complete pathways for these to lead into criminal investigations and prosecutions.
Thank you very much. I just want to ask you one quick follow-up question about that. I'm assuming that Iran is not party to the Rome Statute on the International Criminal Court. But are there ways in which, obviously, some of these crimes that you've listed are also customary international law. But I wondered if there's a way that the International Criminal Court could hold some of these people accountable if were they to travel outside of the country.
So yes, as you mentioned, Iran is not a party to the Rome Statute, so does not recognize the court's jurisdiction. And that effectively really leaves the referral to the Security Council, which of course is always a measure that states the Security Council can take. In many situations, they have not, or they have, but that is the mechanism, the route that should be pursued. And I must note that also during the special session of the Human Rights Council, at least one state during their interventions did specifically mention that if in the investigations, the special inquiry into these unprecedented killings and crackdown overall finds crimes under the Rome Statute, then a referral should be explored. So that is basically one of the member states of the Human Rights Council. But as you mentioned, Iran is not a party.
Okay, thank you very much, Bahar. Let me turn to you, Hossein. Can you tell us a bit more? You spoke at length about the death penalty and how it's being used against protesters, but can you talk about whether or not the use of the death penalty disproportionately affects marginalized groups, as well as youth who are not often thought of as a singular group, but who often are engaged in these types of process and these types of social political movements?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, when we are watching some news within Iran, the Iranian authority try to deny and ignoring, deliberately ignore the law during the protest since 28 December 28, 2025. And I was watching an interview of the head of the judiciary who has ignored the law. And then he has mentioned and complained that some judges were not feeling serious charges against the youth. And he was talking about a youth that he was detained. And so he asked the judge to change the charge of a young protester from disturbing public order to the more serious acting against national security. In my view, it seems that the regime in Iran had been waiting for years for something to happen in the country. We were in a state of severe political and social blockage. The people of Iran are so progressive, revolutionary, and forwarding looking, demanding a better life. But at the same time, the government continue to impose Islamic condition under their own interpretation of the Islamic rule, and they put many young students from high school in the detention centers, not in the appropriate detention center, not in the juvenile detention center, broadly in many ways an unknown detention center. At the same time, even in some storages. Yesterday, I was watching something from a friend that shared with me directly a witness that many workers, many young students, they have been arrested, and within no condition, even within the 23 days, none of them had access to hot water to take a shower. It means that the condition of the detention center is broadly, and severely, it's unhuman, in unhuman conditions. And it means they have been arrested many people, and they try to continue their own oppression against the civilian since they made a crime against the humanity, as my colleague in a panel has mentioned. And it means that the Iranian legal system exactly try to deny even basic rights of any young people that they have been detained, and even some of them under the age of 15. And it means they deny to apply their own juvenile framework and juvenile protection act that they do have. They recognize children at risk within the juvenile law in Iran, but they do not apply any of part of define the children at risk, because children, youth in contact with the justice system, with the policing system, with the security force system, they have known as a children at risk, but they never ever play that, and they charge them broadly, and unfortunately, some of them with the muharebe, as I explained earlier about this charge, some of them with the crimes against the state, and more broadly about the assembly, participating in assembly against the state. At the same time, Iranian constitution recognized any protest, peaceful protest and assembly gathering, but the judiciary, unfortunately, they have been using their own ways against them, and they have no respect with the young people that they have been arrested, and even their family have no chance to be in contact. Even Iranian youth system recognize that immediately after any under age of 18 have been arrested, they must be in contact with their own guardians and access to their own lawyers. But the authority deny all basic rights to protect them, and unfortunately torture them. And I can say, unfortunately, few of them, when they released from the prison, they committed suicide. Yeah, thank you. That hopefully will be clear.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hussein. That's a horrific situation. So let me now turn to Omid. How does facing this violent repression on the part of the Iranian people prompt us to think about our understanding of the right to self-defense?
Thank you, Penelope. I think it is an important question, especially within the current context in Iran. And I will try to be as brief as possible so that we have enough time for the Q&A period. But responding to this question, if I may, I would like to invoke two symbols that are often associated with human rights: the flame and the shield. The flame, I would suggest, symbolizes freedom, while the shield represents the timeless right of individuals to self-defense. I would argue that all human rights can be construed and understood as abstractions of the pre-political right of self-defense. In the face of abusive and violent states, we invoke different rights and concepts, such as the right to life, bodily integrity, due process, and so forth. But what animates these invocations is a deeper claim: the right to protect oneself from violence, the violence of often the state, the violence that the state perpetrates. It is then, to me, no surprise that the right to self-defense, despite its primordial character, does not appear explicitly in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Declaration presupposes it. At the same time, the right appears explicitly in Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter, though there it is reserved exclusively for the UN members, that is, sovereign states. Yet human beings, as original sovereigns, as I mentioned, possess a universal and inherent right to defend themselves. In situations of armed conflict or extreme repression, this may include resorting to force in order to survive. This right is pre-political, in many respects, extra-legal, and it is fundamentally a matter of survival. Today, the right to self-defense has been, in my opinion, misconstrued and monopolized in international law by the states, even when those very states are the primary perpetrators of violence. In such context, denying individuals the right to defend themselves is not a neutral legal position. It is rather a moral and political choice. Facing violent repression, therefore, compels us to re-examine self-defense as a human right, the right that remains extremely relevant, especially in such contexts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Omid. So as you mentioned, we're now going to turn to the question and answer session. And there is one question so far in the Q&A, so I would, encourage those of you attending the webinar to write your questions here, and we will do our best to answer them. So the first question is, what legal tools are available or should be created to protect people immediately when mass violence is happening inside a closed country, not just to document the crimes for the future? And that is from Akash Pratap. Would anybody like to take that question? Perhaps you could all come back in with your turning your cameras back on. Thanks.
Okay.
Bahar, would you like to think about that, or anybody? Saba, Omid?
Okay, I will go through.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah, that's a great question. At this time, and that Iranian regime put the country in in a blackout of the internet, and everything is under control of the at least 16 intelligence services that Iranian government has. It means a lot. And it's so difficult to communicate with the Iranian inside the country, and it's so difficult to provide them any advising. But at the same time, Iranian inside of the country, as well as lawyers inside of the country, they have been providing some support, and they announce some way to be in contact. But unfortunately, this is not a ordinary situation and ordinary system to go through the ordinary ways. The best way to support the Iranian inside of the country, family of the people that they lost their loved one, and also their loved one are in the detention center, is to be their voices. To be their voices is so important. Asking international community to be responsible about the crimes against humanity that occur in the Iranian in the age of the modernism, so-called modernism. We have been living in the 21st century. But why a government are allowed to do such a mass killing? And some countries around Iran at that region supported them. And we have to go through those governments, asking them stop supporting such that brutal government. We have to go through the UN and the international mechanism system to ask Iranian authority to be accountable. Unfortunately, we have been living in the age of a human rights crisis, but still, I believe people around the globe and anyone who loves to live in the peace must be aware that the peace must be a collective behavior. If people of Iran, they are dealing with the brutal government and they don't have peace, everyone around the globe must be their voice and asking peace and justice for them. And yeah, the best way is to ask international community to put pressure on Iranian authority and make them accountable, and also try to not communicate and recognize this brutal government as an ordinary government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hussein, for that. I want to come back to that, but there's another question here from my colleague, Regine Habibi. Hi, Regine. She says, I thank you very much to all the panelists for their very insightful remarks. In relation to movement building for the protests in Iran, are you concerned by calls from that may come from the diaspora for US or other external intervention? And if so, how can the narrative change to focus on the dignity and agency of the Iranian people themselves? Does anybody want to take that question? So instead of focusing on calling outside help, go ahead, Saba, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should consider that historically and systematically, Islamic regime in Iran, they have two form of suppression. One in the street, and then when they crack down the people in the street, and then they annihilate all the voices in the street, and then they come to the jail, to carceral space, to society. They promote themselves on social media that everything is calm and quiet, that this is the feedback or the question I am constantly receiving from my journalist colleague. They said to me, it sounds everything is dead right now, which is not true. This is the propaganda that the regime is perpetuating through social media and by their agent or mouthpiece or other people in social media or any other platforms. As I said earlier, there are at least those people who I am dealing with. There are many injured people. Some of them are paralyzed as a result of being struck by the bullet, and they don't dare to come to the social media or to reveal the truth. Their ongoing protests exist, and just the protest has been reshaped in another form. However, we cannot see all those information in social media, and we should not be a passive witness. We should, all the pieces of those data that people risk their life to send it to us, to transfer to us, we should take each piece seriously. And UNICEF still is mute. Nothing. We had the cases of forced confession of minors. We had cases of children being shot in their eyes in vital organ. Where is the UNICEF really? How we can talk about, just how we can talk about movement building while the human rights industry is blind and they are selective in their battle. And I would like to reiterate that the protest is not dead, and even the journalists doing their own job, they are facing their relative and their family have been subjected to persecution, and I'm including those cohort, which my relative have been summoned several times, and they have been told that they have agent in Australia and they can paralyze me because I have a big mouse as big as I have a loose mouse as loose as a camel. So can you see complexity of situation? However, Iranian issues and Iranian struggle is not in the headline of the news. It's an accessory issues because perhaps they don't meet the threshold of fighting against imperialism. That's why many progressive left, they think, okay, it does not meet our threshold to stand with.
Mhm. Thank you very much, Saba.
And
Mana,
we
you
need
had
to
something you
think
wanted. Oh,
about,
sorry.
and I would like to add, in the context of Iran, we need to think about, we have Sunni, we have Shia, we have very diverse religion and belief system in our country. Many of them who have been killed, who have been injured, who have been paralyzed, who have been incarcerated, who have been persecuted, they are Muslim too. And we need to reshape the way that the West thinks about who is worthy to be recognized. And what I was going to say, who is worthy to be recognized, because this is the battle of Muslim people against Islamic fundamentalism. It is part of the protest, that part of the protesters are Muslims who are fighting against radical Islam. And they must be recognized. Their humanity, its fundamental human rights, their humanity and their arbitrary violation of right to life must be recognized by human rights industry.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Saba. Let me turn to Mana. You had something you wanted to add to this question.
Yes, thank you, Penelope. I would like to share just very brief insights on both of the questions that were asked. I think to reiterate Saba's point, it's very important to see the nuances and complexities of the context of Iran. And the way I want to talk about it is that it is the call for an intervention is not a simple issue for the Iranian community either. Even some of the people who are calling for the intervention recognize that it is complex, that it can be derailed, that it can bring a lot of atrocities with itself. And it's also not just a call by people in the diaspora or by other countries. There is a genuine demand within the country as well by people who are seeking some form of intervention. Now, I think as scholars with critical thinking, our job is to say, okay, we understand how tricky it can be for foreign intervention to happen. However, as it was mentioned, there is a need for mechanisms that can stop the atrocities, not just record them and make sure that perpetrators are held accountable. So I think something unfortunate that has happened in the international legal order is that perhaps the taking of those extra steps, some form of humanitarian intervention, that has been left by many of the powers who can do it in less of a selfish way, who can do it in maybe in a form of an alliance of powers intervening in a way that would actually empower people and would actually empower their agency instead of trying to override it. And so when that space is emptied by a lot of middle powers, I think that is what creates and diverts the attention to superpower interventions who can very much be disempowering when in effect they happen. And I would also like to say that interventions don't have to be military, and there are other forms of interventions that can also be helpful. The people of Iran have been calling for years now for methods and mechanisms to be established so that their connections can be maintained even when the regime decides to shut down the internet, and providing that infrastructure to make sure that people stay connected and that this form of massacre cannot happen in a complete blackout. That is something the international community can cooperate to provide. And so it's a complex situation, and I just wanted to emphasize the nuances that it is even some of the people, many of the people that are calling for intervention recognize that it can be problematic. It is just that people are extremely desperate in the face of such mass atrocities, and you cannot fight a heavily armed regime empty-handed, and people are just looking for any way out. That's it.
Mhm. Thank you very much, Mana. Let me turn to Omid. I know you had something you wanted to say in response to this as well.
Just quickly to Rogin's question, I think I also touched briefly on the fact that no one gets to define what the Iranian people want at this point. And making decision on behalf of Iranians is, I think, is very concerning coming from any external source. But as Mana mentioned, there are different means of intervention. There are different modes of expression. And I think that within the right to freedom of expression, anyone from diaspora, from different communities is entitled to the right to express their opinions. But I think the red line here is to make decision on behalf of the Iranian people. And I would characterize such deeds as colonial and imperialist. And I think this is extremely dangerous narrative, and it ought to be avoided.
Thank you, Omid. I'm going to, there's another question from Akash, but I'm going to go to the other two questions and then we'll come back to Akash's question afterwards. There's a question here for you, Omid, from Arthur Graham, related to the dignity and agency of citizens. He said that you correctly cite the covenants which place the inherent human dignity first, but many states, not only in Iran, place God before humans and assume responsibility to control citizens on behalf of God. Human rights exist only as with respect to God's creation of humans. Apparently, the former Justice Minister of Afghanistan said this. What does that do to the international norms in national human rights law when even the Canadian Constitution places God first before the rule of law? Humanist norms come later and after the subject to the supremacy of God. But does this tend to a right versus a left element in terms of international support and opinion? And then he says he hopes this is not too provoking.
I think that's an excellent question, and it requires volumes of books and so much research. But just to be brief, I think we should look into the origins of state sovereignty, especially in the Westphalian world order. Obviously, the conceptualization of the state is extremely religious, and it came out of religious wars, and also it is deeply abstract, although it has real consequences and ramifications. But to place God before citizens and acknowledging their agency in many constitutions, including the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and also in many other constitutions, is not a coincidence. It is characteristic and symptomatic of that religious environment that is still extant in international law. That is exactly my argument when I'm speaking of the real individual as sovereign. And I know it is difficult. It is not easy to jump into that standpoint, whether intellectually or practically, but that is nonetheless a real standpoint versus an abstract and also deeply religious stance on the sovereignty of the state. So I think that is a relevant question. I think that brief answer would shed some light on the origins of state sovereignty and how religious it is, and it is widespread around the world.
Okay, thank you very much, Omid. And this next question is from Yasaman Ravan Bakish. Is it possible that there is still a heavy presence of Orientalism in the discussion of what constitutes oppression with the West because they still view the region as a monolith? I think this speaks to some of the comments from Saba and Mana, but I don't know if anybody wants to answer that question.
I can try answering that. Um,
Okay,
I think,
thank you.
yeah, I think the importance is not only that the region is treated as a monolith, but that the region is not being treated for its own sake. And I think Iran so often is just being interpreted as an actor in international geopolitics, and how any change in the context of Iran would affect the regional politics, the international politics, and other countries. And this is not coming from any one political direction either. It's, as it was mentioned by Saba, even the progressive left, we see that it does fall victim to this trope of campus politics and seeing Iran as a mere player in a certain political agenda. And when the people of Iran are not necessarily fulfilling that agenda in the way they are calling for things to change, then we see that the support perhaps hasn't been unconditional after all. And so I think the key is to really listen to the people and prioritize that it is the mass violence and the widespread human rights violations that require our solidarity. And when we are standing with the people of Iran, we can be concerned. It is, as Omid mentioned, it is our right to express our concerns about what this form of change or that form of change could bring to other countries in the region or to the global political landscape. But it doesn't have to affect our sympathy with the people. We can stand with the people and at the same time be concerned or try to think of better ways this could go forward. Yet when our sympathy and our solidarity with the people of Iran wavers in the face of these concerns, then that means that our commitment to human rights is not actually our number one priority. And that's where it becomes problematic.
Thank you very much, Mana.
And I would like to echo what Mana
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
said.
Sorry, Saba, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I think whether or not, yeah, we can hear different voices because Iranians are practicing multi-vocality these days. They are practicing democracy by expressing their view about their future, which is their legitimate rights, whether this side or that side. But they all have the common idea of decapitation of fundamentalist regime and its machinery of annihilation. Just I wanted to add to the discussion, despite all those discussion or contradictory idea about foreign interference should be involved in Iranians' liberty and emancipatory conducts and effort. However, despite all those arguments, all of them have the common idea of decapitation of fundamentalist regime and their machinery of annihilation, that they are still taking lives.
Thank you, Saba. This next question, and it's the last question we have, it is for Hussein. Do you think a policy brief that's prepared by an academic human rights center, such as ours, can realistically influence how the government of Canada or even international courts like the International Court of Justice approach situations involving ongoing mass violence? And if so, how does that influence usually happen in practice?
Thank you. Such a great question. First of all, where we're talking about the situation and addressing the truth, because we are facing with the government who commit crimes against the humanity, at the same time spread false narratives and labeling the protesters as a terrorist, and also sharing false information within the international community. First of all, when we're talking about this situation and having this event, as well as focusing on some truth according the human rights organization activities and asking human rights lawyers that they are working on this situation to address what is going on in Iran and what was happened during the 2 nights that the security force opened the live weapon on the civilians. And when we are talking about that and asking even friends, academics, politicians around us, we make a first step, and then we should go through our politicians and asking them that we are worried about the Iranian people inside of the country. We are worried about such a regime that practice Islamic law in a way that exactly practice ISIS, exactly interpretation that the Iranian regime has and put in their Islamic penal code in order muharebe, corruption on earth, and enemy of the God is exactly same as the ISIS has made. So when we're talking more and sharing some ideas and go through the different medias, as well as asking colleagues around the globe to talk more about that and be committed to the truth, because the Iranian government try to kill and pay less price. They even have mentioned when we kill the people, mass killing happen, it's better to have execution. This is the point that one of the politicians in Iran spread it through the media. And when we're talking about that, we banned the government and do not allow the government to make ordinary mass killing. Mass killing should not be ordinary and normalized in the world. Yeah, through those talking, through those pointing out, even our colleague have mentioned about the international mechanism, different ways that we can support them. At this point, many Iranian in diaspora try to support Iranian that they have been injured. Even today, I was in contact with a physician in Europe, Iranian physician in diaspora, that she is in contact with their family, that their 18 years girl injured, and they are not allowed to take her in the hospital. And they have to deal with this injured, this wounded, open wounded inside of their houses. At the same time, lawyers have been arrested, physicians have been arrested. Yeah, we have to talk about them. The simple way is talking about that and to be committed on the truth and ban this regime, not be allowed to normalize such a mass killing. And at the second step, of course, international community must be responsible. Of course, we have been living in the age of the international human rights crisis and international law crisis, but still we have hope. Still, we are free in Canada and in the Western country, and we can ask them, and we can put them in the position that they have to make a decision and talk about and also go through some political ways. Yeah, I don't want to talk about the bombing Iran, even though I recognize Iranian people, independent them and divided them from their brutal government and help them in any way that you can. Send in some medicines, support them through different way, provide them internet. This is the best way that they can do. But so far, no, it doesn't happen, unfortunately, as Mano has mentioned. There are many ways that international community should be aware, and unfortunately, so far we have facing with the failure of the international community to support Iranian and let the Iranian brutal regime commit a mass killing, and even they shake hands with them.
Thank you very much, Hossein.
I
So
may
it's
just
oh yes, go
very,
ahead. Yeah,
very,
absolutely,
sorry, very
Bahar.
quickly
Yeah,
add
no
something
problem.
on the role
Yeah,
of
please do.
academia, because I think there's often this perhaps distance between practitioners and academia and academics. And there are various ways. One is to ensure that the factual, the kind of reality on the ground remains very much present in academic studies, that there is not, that distance between what is happening on the ground and what is being analyzed in the absence. But perhaps more concretely, when it comes to legal studies, I think for sure there are ways that for legal academics, could there be other examples used in other jurisdictions? Are there precedent that could be relevant? Are there new legal, novel arguments that could argue for jurisdiction before national courts, before international courts? If it's about establishment of new bodies, what have these bodies looked like in other contexts? Hybrid courts, internationalized mechanisms. How could they be comparative study? How would they be adapted to this current situation, to the current political climate, and so on and so forth? So there are many ways that academic studies of what is there in terms of international criminal avenues and how they could be used and adapted by academia could be super helpful, because advocates and practitioners also always look at legal studies and legal arguments, and they use them also when they do advocate for creation of mechanisms for jurisdiction before courts and so on. So all those would be valuable for sure for practitioners and advocates.
Thank you very much, Bahar. Appreciate that. That is sort of a word of hope that there are still things that we can do to address this situation, and that everybody in different different professions has a role to play. Academia, activism, journalism, etc. So, okay, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to share your thoughts and ideas about this terrible situation in Iran, and particularly at this obviously a very heartbreaking situation. And also to thank Omid and Mana and Hossein for helping to organize it, along with Viviana Fernandez and Caroline Fauché at the Human Rights Research and Education Center. So thank you all, and thank you to the people who are attending as well, and for the great questions and the conversation. All right, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.